Amber lantern light fell across the stable cot where Joseph Castellano lay, his weathered hand resting on the muzzle of his red roan Cowboy.
Just the horse. Leave me with him.
Mark Harlow hesitated, his jaw tight, then rose and walked out, leaving the old vaquero alone with his horse. With the last of his strength, Joseph pulled himself upright and pressed his lips to the roan's ear, whispering. The words were no louder than a breath, meant for no one else. Then his hand slipped from the muzzle, and the barn fell into a heavy silence. Joseph Castellano was gone before the last whisper left his lips, his life ending mid-sentence. Mark found him moments later, still as a stone, Cowboy standing motionless over him with a heavy hand. The ranch owner reached down and closed Joseph's eyes. Cowboy did not move, his ears stayed forward, still listening for the voice that would not return. Mark stepped back from the cot, his jaw still set. Tomas and Earl slipped inside, hats in hand, rosaries wound tight around their fingers.
68 years breaking horses on this land. Don't know a man who gave more to this outfit.
He asked for the horse. Just the horse. That means something. What did he say?
Cobra's head lifted from the body. He began to pace the stall, a low, restless sound rising in his throat.
Easy, Cowboy, easy. Easy, boy.
But Cowboy refused to be let out. He pulled back, ears flat, when Earl reached for the halter.
Leave him. Let him grieve his own way. We owe him that much.
Snow began to fall outside the barn, heavy and silent, blanketing the Wyoming ground in soft white. The moon rose full and cold over the ranch. Inside the stall, the red roan stood over the old man, still as a sentinel, but his breathing was shallow and his muscles twitched in the dark. His eye rolled, reflecting the lantern flame and something else, a purpose beyond grief. At 4 a.m., the stall latch splintered. Cowboy shouldered through the loose boards and stepped into the moonlit snow. He limped with age, but his path was straight, across the empty pasture toward the dark silhouette of the chapel. Snow swallowed his hoof falls. No one saw him cross the half-mile under the full moon. At the chapel wall, he pawed the frozen earth. Once, twice, 3 times, with force that broke the crust of ice. Then he folded his legs, pressed his body into the snow, and lay still beside the spot where he had dug. Tomas noticed the empty stall first. His flashlight caught the splintered latch, then the line of hoofprints leading away.
Madre de Dios, Cowboy?
The roan didn't stir. His breath came in thin plumes, but his eyes were open and fixed on the chapel stone.
Boss, you need to get down here. It's Cowboy. He's at the old chapel. He won't get up.
Mark and Earl arrived as dawn bled into the sky, boots crunching over fresh snow, breath catching when they saw what Cowboy had done. Mark grabbed the halter and braced his boots in the snow. He threw his weight backward, but the roan's neck was solid as a fence post.
Get up, Cowboy. You hear me? You are going to freeze out here.
The horse threw his head against the pull, then drove a hoof down, gouging the frozen dirt deeper. Tomas slid a rope around the roan's chest and pulled beside Mark. Together they strained until their boots skidded, but Cowboy remained a dead weight.
This ain't grief. I've seen horses grieve. This is something deliberate.
Whatever it is, we can't let him die out here. Call Lucy.
Doc, it's Cowboy. He's at the old chapel. He broke out and just lay down. Please hurry.
20 minutes later, Lucy Chapman's pickup bounced over the rutted field, headlights cutting through the gray dawn. She climbed out, hauling her medical kit, her face all business, but her eyes softened when she saw the horse lying in the snow.
He's been like this since 4 in the morning. Won't eat, won't stand. I've never seen a horse do this.
Lucy knelt in the snow, her stethoscope pressed to the roan's ribs, her free hand gentle on his neck.
Lungs are clear, heart's strong. No fever, no obvious pain response. I can't find a single physical problem.
She checked his eyes, his gums, ran a hand down each tendon. Every test came back normal.
I've read about horses that grieve themselves to death, but that takes weeks. This horse is choosing to lie down on this exact spot.
Then what's the treatment? An IV? Sedatives? You are the vet. Give me something.
I can keep him hydrated, but if he won't stand, his organs will start to fail. This isn't a medical refusal, Mark. It's a decision.
Joseph whispered into his ear. What if he told the horse to come here, like a last command?
My grandmother used to talk about such things. Horses carrying secrets. Maybe we should look at what's under him.
Mark stared at the pawed earth, then at the horse. The sun was rising, but no warmth reached them. Cowboy's breathing was shallower now, his frost-covered coat barely rising. The hole he dug was a perfect oval, and it held the morning light. 2 days passed. Cowboy did not move. His breathing was shallow. The water bucket froze solid. On the third morning, a black SUV with out-of-state plates rolled through the ranch gate. A well-dressed man stepped out, polished boots sinking into the snow, a survey map tucked under his arm. Mark met him at the chapel. The developer pointed at the field and made his offer. An hour later, the SUV was gone. Mark sat alone on a hay bale, staring at Cowboy.
What did he offer you?
$500,000 above market for the chapel field. Says the horse is a liability.
You can't sell. Not without knowing why Cowboy is here. Joseph trusted you.
Cowboy's ribcage rose and fell with a wet, rattling sound, his eyes barely open.
If we dig and find nothing, I'll have thrown away a fortune for a ghost story.
That evening, Tomas placed a wrinkled photograph on the feed barrel in front of Mark, a black and white print cracked with age.
That's him with his grandfather. At the chapel, 1955. Same spot where Cowboy is lying.
Mark lifted the photo. The chapel stones behind them were identical, the same weathered edges, the same tilt of the cross above the door.
Joseph used to say the ground here held a promise. I thought he meant his faith. Maybe he meant something else.
A photograph doesn't change anything. Joseph worked here 68 years. There are 1,000 pictures of him.
But this one showed the grandfather holding a shovel, and his hand rested on a small cross driven into the ground.
Boss, we have to dig. Cowboy knows something. He's dying to tell us.
One picture and a horse that won't eat. That's not enough to tear up the chapel ground.
At the chapel, Cowboy's ear flicked once, then lay still again. His breathing was so faint the frost barely melted around his nostrils. Mark studied the photograph again, his thumb grazing the old man's face. Then he looked out at the horse. The decision pressed down on him like a second winter. The next morning, Mark pushed open the chapel door into the cold, stale air. Tomas and Earl followed, flashlights cutting through the dark.
Search every corner. Look for any record, any paper that ties Joseph's family to this land.
Tomas lifted a loose floorboard under a rotting pew, finding only dust. Earl thumbed through a mildewed hymnal, the pages crumbling in his hands. Tomas pulled a leather-bound ledger from a collapsed shelf, the old parish record book. Its spine split, pages yellow and brittle. They spread it on the stone floor, tracing the faded ink with their fingers. Baptisms, marriages, burials, names from 1880 onward, neat columns of Latin script.
There's no Castellano here, not one.
Mark ran his thumb over an entry from 1881. A land grant recorded to another family entirely. Nothing for Joseph's people.
This doesn't prove anything. Just proves his family wasn't in the church book.
They searched until the light failed. Every loose stone, every crack in the mossy wall. The chapel offered nothing. When Mark stepped outside, Cowboy lay motionless under a fresh dusting of snow, his eyes still fixed on the spot he had chosen. The horse held the only answer, and he was fading. Before the frost on the chapel stone could melt, the black SUV returned, its chrome grille mocking the quiet snow. The developer stepped out in a heavier wool coat, his jaw set, his patience clearly spent.
I've given you 3 days, Harlow. Move the animal, or I reclassify the parcel. The premium vanishes at noon. The premium was never yours to hold. This horse isn't a bargaining chip.
Lucy Chapman's pickup skidded to a halt behind them, her door slamming before the engine died.
His creatinine levels have spiked. If he doesn't stand and drink by tomorrow morning, his kidneys fail completely.
Boss, Joseph gave 68 years to this ground. The least we can do is let his horse speak for him.
Sentiment has a price, gentlemen. Clear the field, cash the check. It's not complicated.
Mark turned from the developer and knelt beside Cowboy. The horse's breath was a thin, irregular flutter against the snow. He pressed a hand to Cowboy's neck, feeling the weak pulse beneath the frozen coat. The SUV idled behind him, waiting. Mark straightened and turned to face the developer, his voice raw but steady.
Dig. At the spot he pawed. Right now.
Tomas didn't wait. He pulled a long-handled shovel from the truck bed and strode toward the pawed earth.
Finally, let the horse's truth come up.
He thrust the blade into the frozen crust where Cowboy had worn the snow thin. The sound cracked through the morning stillness.
I'll get the pick. We'll need it.
Earl and Tomas fell into rhythm, shovels biting deeper, the dark soil piling on the white snow. Lucy stood back, an IV bag still in her hand, her eyes moving between the hole and the horse's shallow breathing. The SUV's engine rumbled, then faded as it turned back down the ranch road, dusted with fresh snow. Mark knelt again beside Cowboy as the sun broke over the mountains, his gaze fixed on the deepening hole and the unknown below. 2 feet down, Tomas's shovel jarred against metal with a clang that cut the air. All motion stopped.
I hit something. It's not stone.
Earl dropped to his knees and clawed at the dirt with bare hands. A rusted tin box surfaced, seams weeping melted snow. Mark took the box and worked the corroded clasp until it snapped. The lid opened with a shriek of old hinges. Inside, a folded sheet of linen paper lay against a tarnished crucifix. The ink had bled, but the date was unmistakable. 1881.
That writing. That's a land grant, if I've ever seen one.
Mark's fingers were careful as he opened the document across his thigh. The ornate letterhead read, Grant Deed, and beneath it, 40 acres, surveyed and bounded.
To Jose Castellano, his heirs and assigns in perpetuity.
Dios mío. Joseph's grandfather. He held this ground and no one ever knew.
And at that sound, Cowboy lifted his head off the snow and nickered once, his breath streaming in the sunlight. Mark looked from the deed to the horse, the truth settling like a second heartbeat. Mark cradled the deed in his hands as he placed the call, his voice unsteady for the first time since Joseph had died. An hour later, Samuel Whitfield's car crunched to a halt, and the lawyer stepped out with a leather briefcase clamped under his arm. Whitfield spread the deed on the wooden table and pulled a magnifying glass from his coat, his movements precise.
The seal is genuine. The signatures match county records from that period. This deed has never been annulled or superseded.
He pulled a faded survey map from his briefcase and laid it over the deed, the boundaries of the ranch's richest pasture, aligning with the 40 acres described.
This is the most valuable section of your ranch, Mark. If this deed holds, Joseph's heirs own it outright.
Heirs? Joseph had no family here. He was alone.
He told no one. But the law doesn't require his telling. It requires a valid deed and blood descendants. If they exist, they inherit.
Whitfield looked over his glasses, his tones softening for the first time.
I'll begin the search immediately, but you must prepare yourself. This deed is a moral and legal obligation.
After Whitfield's car disappeared down the ranch road, Mark returned to the tin box on the chapel step. His fingers found a folded paper still tucked beneath the lining.
There's something written on it, for the owner, in Joseph's hand.
Mark lifted it with care, the paper so dry it crackled at the edges. The men gathered close.
To the owner of this ranch, my grandfather, Jose Castellano, was given this land by deed, but a man with a lawyer's pen took it. I kept this secret not for revenge, but for the day it would matter. I waited 68 years, working the ground that should have been mine. I loved this place enough to suffer in silence, trusting that Cobra would know when to speak for me.
Mark's voice cracked. He stopped to wipe his eyes with the back of his hand.
That old man, he carried this alone all those years.
He wasn't just a cowhand. He was a soul holding the ranch together with his silence.
I kept faith with this land. Now let it keep faith with my blood.
He folded the letter and pressed it to his heart. Outside, Cobra whinnied once, a sound that seemed to answer. Mark walked to the house alone, the deed and letter in his coat. He dialed his daughter before even taking off his boots.
If a man gave his life to your land, but you found out the deed was never his, do you give it back? That's what she said. Then you already know the answer, Dad.
As Mark stepped out, Tomas was waiting by the barn door, arms crossed, his jaw set.
Joseph wore your brand on his shirt for 68 winters. That land isn't yours to lose. It's his to give.
I know what he'd want. I just don't know what I can survive.
You can survive being a good man. That's what he was.
Tomas walked away, leaving Mark alone under the winter sky. The wind cut across the field. He looked toward the chapel where Cobra still lay, a dark shape against the snow, and understood that the horse would not move until he did. The choice was no longer financial or legal. It was a covenant between a man, a horse, and the truth buried in Wyoming dirt. In the ranch kitchen, Mark lifted the receiver and dialed Whitfield's number from memory, his hand steady now.
Samuel, I've decided. I am honoring the deed. Joseph's heirs, they get that land.
Mark, that's 40 acres of prime pasture. The financial impact could be severe.
He gave 68 years of his life to this ranch, Samuel. I am giving back 40 acres.
Whitfield was silent for a long moment. Then Mark heard the scratch of a pen.
I'll file the preliminary petition, but finding descendants in Mexico, this could take weeks.
Mark leaned against the counter, the weight of the decision settling into his bones.
Take all the time it needs. Just get it done before Cobra runs out of breath.
In Cheyenne, Whitfield opened a new file and began drafting the legal notice, the deed beside his keyboard. Outside the window, the red roan lay in the snow, waiting for the justice that had been buried for 140 years. Mark strode to the chapel field, the hands straightening as he approached. The deed and Joseph's letter were folded in his grip.
I made a decision. The 40 acres around this chapel belong to Joseph's grandchildren. They'll get the deed.
Tomas's jaw dropped. Earl took off his hat. Lucy stopped her IV flow. And in that silence, Cobra lifted his head from the snow. His neck curled upward, nostrils searching the air, as if he had been waiting for those exact words. Then he pushed his front legs forward, hooves scrabbling on the frozen dirt. His body rose inch by inch, trembling with the effort, until he stood, weak but upright, over the pawed ground.
Dios mío, he's standing. The horse is standing.
Cobra took one shaky step toward Mark, then another, his breath a cloud, eyes locked on the man who had spoken the truth. And for the first time in days, the red roan did not lie down again. The curse was broken. Cobra's muzzle found Mark's shoulder, a brief, soft press, the way he used to greet Joseph after a long ride.
He's blessing you, boss. That's what he's doing.
Then the roan turned, his legs still uncertain, and began to walk toward the open chapel field, step by step. His hooves left the frozen circle and moved into the winter grass. The men stood watching, silent, their breath catching with each stride. When he reached the heart of the pasture, Cobra lowered his head and began to graze. Mark's chest ached not with loss of land, but with the weight of a promise kept.
Never seen a horse do that. Never.
The sun climbed higher, melting the frost on the chapel stones, and the red roan ate his fill. He would not return to the barn. This field was his now, and he would stay. Weeks after Cobra stood, a registered letter crossed the border into Jalisco, Mexico, bearing the Harlow Ranch seal. Maria Castellano Garcia slid it open on her doorstep, a grainy photograph of Joseph falling into her palm.
This letter says our abuelo owned 40 acres in Wyoming. 40 acres, deeded to his grandfather in 1881.
She called her brothers, Carlos and Luis, and read every word through tears. The phone pressed between them.
He didn't abandon us. He was holding on to this land all those years, waiting for the right moment.
She clutched the photograph. Joseph Young, his hand on a horse's neck, and pressed it to her heart.
We have to go, Carlos. We need to see the land where he worked all his life.
In Wyoming, Mark received word that the heirs had been found, and he told Whitfield to prepare the papers. The next step would bring Maria to the ranch, and to the horse that had carried her grandfather's secret. A weathered pickup rolled through the ranch gate under a bright Wyoming sky, Maria in the passenger seat clutching Joseph's photograph. Mark met her at the fence, his hand extended, seeing Joseph's eyes in her face.
Your grandfather gave more to this ground than anyone alive. I am just giving it back.
I used to think he forgot us. Now I understand. He was guarding this for us.
They walked together through the chapel field, the grass bending with the wind, toward the grazing red roan. Cowboy lifted his head as Maria approached, his gaze meeting hers with a stillness that needed no translation. She pressed her palm flat against his neck, and the horse exhaled long and slow.
He's beautiful. He knew, didn't he? He waited for us.
Mark stood several paces back, but he saw Cowboy lower his muzzle until it rested against Maria's shoulder. The same benediction the horse had given the man now passed to the bloodline, right there on the Wyoming earth. That afternoon, they gathered in the ranch office, Maria, Mark, and Whitfield, with the final papers, the 1881 deed resting under glass.
This document transfers full legal title to the heirs of Jose Castellano, effective immediately upon your signatures.
I'll offer fair market value for the parcel. You don't have to lease it back, but the ranch needs this pasture.
We want the land to stay as it is. We'll lease it to you, same terms your grandfather would have offered. It's what he would have wanted.
She signed, and Mark countersigned, the pen scratching like a final hoof stroke. When they stepped outside, Cowboy was grazing in the chapel field, his coat glowing in the afternoon sun. Mark watched the horse, understanding that the land was never truly his. It had been Joseph's all along, and now it was his family's.
My grandfather worked this ground for 68 years. Now we'll honor it by letting it grow.
Cowboy lifted his head and nickered toward them, as if acknowledging the covenant. The deed was done, and the red roan remained, a living symbol of a promise kept across generations. Spring came to the chapel field, and Cowboy grazed on the new grass, his coat warm in the sun. For 2 more years, the red roan lived in that pasture, visited often by the Hands and Maria when she could come. Then, one morning, Tomas found him lying peacefully at the foot of the chapel stone. He had not suffered.
He's with Joseph now.
Mark ordered 2 headstones from the granite cutter in town. He paid for both himself. They set the first stone where Joseph's body had been laid to rest, beside the chapel wall. The second, smaller stone they placed beside it, bearing only the name Cowboy and the years he served. On a still afternoon, the ranch hands, Maria, and a few others gathered among the wildflowers that had sprung around the graves. No one spoke much. The wind said enough. The 2 stones stood together under the Wyoming sky, a man and his horse, finally home. Golden light flooded the chapel field, igniting the headstones in amber and pink. On Joseph's stone, the engraving caught the last light. He kept the faith. Maria knelt and laid a bundle of sage, tied with leather across the granite base, and in the deep gold of the sinking sun, a red roan stood in the field where the grass grew tallest. Mark saw it too, from the fence line, a shape that should not be there, and he said nothing. Tomas took off his hat. Earl crossed himself. Then they all walked back, leaving the field to the quiet. The roan lifted his head once, mane catching the breeze, then faded into the golden light. Wind swept the grass flat, and the headstones held their vigil as the light drained into the mountains. The land endured, as Joseph Castellano knew it would, and in the stillness, a single hoofbeat echoed once and then was gone.